access.
Normally there's like 40 people and my mom.
Yeah. So Mars, ability to so possibly moving some forward.
Where are you supposed to look?
Is about doing this.
Somebody else is over. Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Whenever we do investing events, we don't have turnouts like this one. And this is probably the single reason why we did this, because I was talking to a few of the attendees, and I've had feedback before about how investing can often, forget the Muslim side, investing generally can be a very male-dominated space. And then when it comes to Muslims in particular, you can just times that by another 10 on top. And so as IFG, as Islamic Finance Guru, as in, as a Islamic investment platform, we found it, particularly tricky to create a space where, we can welcome women in and they feel comfortable to be able to speak. So that's our attempt. Today is our attempt at, starting that conversation. And I think it's really important from a mission perspective for us, because, for us, the whole thing has always been about how we can help the Muslim community level up financially. And if we are sincere about that goal, then if we're not addressing 50% of that audience, then clearly we're doing something, wrong. We're missing the mark. And so this is, crucially important. And, from a financial perspective as well, as a community, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when our parents and some of the first migrants came across to the UK, perhaps in those environments, the men did a lot more of the earning, shall we say, and looking after of the money. I think that's fundamentally changed over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And now more than ever, if there's no financial literacy across the board, from children to men and women, and actually, frankly, elders as well, judging from, some of the portfolios I've seen, is just a complete imperative. And otherwise, we're going to be losing money as a community. So inshallah, we'll be doing some good stuff today. The plan for today is that I'll be giving you hopefully some of the really practical take-home stuff, because initially we were thinking, let's have a panel, but what we wanted to do was not just leave you inspired by this incredible lineup of panelists that we've got in front of us today, and we will be inspired, but also we want to give you inspiration, but with a specific direction and with some tangible, actionable things that you can take away as well. And so that's where I come in with a boring 20-minute spiel on exactly what you should be doing with your money. So let's begin. Just checking if there's anything else I should be mentioning. Yeah, so we've got books, Halal Investing for Beginners, for sale today, and all profits will be going to charity. So they'll be going to Reed Foundation towards girls' education across the world, but particularly Pakistan. Why do we care about this entire subject? All of us, there's one thing that unites all of us, and that is our religion, Islam. And there are 5 things that will be questioned on the Day of Judgment before we're even allowed to move from the spot that we're standing. And of those things, 2 of them are how we earned our wealth and how we spent our wealth. And so if we've not got that right, then we're potentially fundamentally misstepping in a really important way. And if we think about our careers, that's probably about 20 to 30 years of our life. And if we think about the other half of that career, which is you earn the money and then you spend it on the other half of that career, in the 5 p.m. and onwards time. And if we're not spending it in the right way, if we're not buying our homes in the right way, then actually that can be, a very, very tricky place to be. And I find that, sometimes for the younger in our community, by the time they get to the 50s or 60s perhaps, that's the point when the first kindlings of a religious awakening happen. And at that point, they realize that actually their entire portfolio wasn't Sharia compliant from the start. And then they're facing some really serious, painful purification processes that they have to, effectively give away a lot of the money. And so in order to avoid all of that, it's really important we get this right from the start. The second thing I'd say, and the why for me is actually the most important thing, why we're discussing anything today. The second thing is, where the money flows. Like you see these canals outside, where water flows is where ultimately you see growth, where you see greenery. And back in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, where you get these irrigation systems where they fight over the pipes. Have you seen that? Where there's this like canal and then someone cuts the pipe or someone steals the water. Why do they do that? Well, apart from the ethical point of view, the reason why they do that is because where the water flows is where you're going to see the fields grow. And us as a collective, many of us probably attended some of the protests with the devastation and the genocide that's happening in Israel-Palestine at the moment. And the remarkable thing is that many of the same people, millions of people that have marched over the last few years, a whole bunch of them, their investments, their money is actually sat in the wrong fields. Their money, their water is being directed into the very fields that they are protesting the crop of. And so it's vital for us to make sure that we are investing both in a halal way, but also in an ethical way. And the final thing is obviously what we're going to be talking about today is going to actually make you money, which is a relatively easy sell, I find. So for those of you who are not familiar with what we do, Islamic Finance Guru started back in 2015, 2016 as a blog, where myself and Mr. Patel, Mohsin Patel, who had hair at the time. Actually, I'm not sure he had hair at the time, but he had a smaller beard. And so over time, it's kind of reversed, where the beard's got longer and the hair's got shorter. So me and Mohsin, we set up IFG back in 2015, 2016 as a blog, as a labor of love. And we were both corporate lawyers for our sins. And we just spent 4 or 5 years as a hobby, educating the community and primarily, frankly, educating ourselves. We were doing some, Islamic studies and, corporate studies at the time. And it was a reflection of that. And fast forward to 2019, we decided to go full time on IFG, packed in the day job and jumped in, much to the worry of some of our parents. And probably they were right to be worried as well, because I think a month later COVID hit, which was quite shocking. But it was okay, because actually COVID turned out to be a massive stimulus package for the investment community. And so today, 2025. Alhamdulillah, there's a team of about 40 of us. So we've got offices. This one in London is the main one, and then we've got one in the UAE and Cape Town. And the mission has always been the same: how can we help our community level up financially through education, where we do content, we do events like this. We might write books. We might write posts on social media, all focused around trying to lower the barriers to the education that is needed for our community to prosper financially. And then the second thing that we do is actual investments. So today we manage around $150 million, and we invest it across a whole range of different asset classes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I'm going to be very quick through this presentation, because I want to hear from the panelists, frankly, myself, because this presentation I've heard many times. The first principle, and the only principle that I would like you to take away when it comes to personal finance, is this formula. And you don't need to be an A-level or an undergraduate in maths to be able to analyze this formula. Income minus expenditure equals savings. So if I could, this is not a trick question, don't worry. If I could have an answer to this question. If you want to increase your savings, and you've told me you're a mathematician, so I might have to come to you. Income minus expenditure equals savings. So if you want to increase your savings, what are the two things you can do? Go on.
Increase your income
Increase your income
or decrease your savings?
and decrease your expenditure. Fantastic. There's a lot of A stars in the room, I think. So that's exactly right. And actually, it's a really simple formula, but it carries a lot of truth to it, which is that if we are not breaking even in our day-to-day affairs, then we're not actually going to the point of investing and growing. And so that's the first thing, right? Our income needs to be more than our expenditure in order to start having savings that we can work with. And then the second thing that we can do in order to grow those savings is to make sure that we're growing our income and decreasing our expenditure. And this I would actually, suggest to you afterwards that you should actually do this for yourself. You should sit down, and it doesn't have to be very detailed. You don't necessarily have to get out spreadsheets, although, brownie points if you do that. Write down what your income is and roughly what your expenditure is over the last few months, and actually figure out what is it that you're saving on an annual basis, and then map that to what is the goal that you have set yourself from an investment or from a life perspective. Because sometimes when I talk to people, they say things because they've heard it perhaps on the internet that I'm looking for financial freedom and I'm going to retire when I'm the age of 40. And then you dig deeper and the savings that they're making are just not matching up with that reality. And so really important for us to make sure that we're doing the maths for ourselves, but then also taking that hard fact of life and then mapping it to what is it that we actually want to achieve. And if it's the case that we are bang on track, brilliant, no need to worry. But if it's the case that we're not, then now we have two levers that we know we can work with, which is either we need to increase our income by going for a better job, getting additional qualifications, working more, potentially getting married to a spouse, right? And combining the salaries is a fantastic way of actually being able to afford, buying a house in London today. So all of those things and tactics should be fully used. And then expenditure is the other one, and we should go after the big expenditures. And I won't necessarily go into all of those. The other key thing about investments and personal finance when done well is that it's a all-encompassing thing. So at each stage of our life, and by the way, I'm kind of whistling through this, but there's a much longer video where we go through in exhaustive detail all of this stuff. There's also the book which does that, but in even more detail. So you don't need to worry about taking it all in right now. So you can refer back to other places. But if you look at the different stages that we have in our life, at each stage, if we make the right decision, it can have a life-changing outcome, but not just for us, but entire generations. I'm very fond of telling this story, and Kabzi's heard this many times, where I was once in Bradford, as many good stories start. And Bradford, it was a typical street of terraced houses, the standard terraced houses that you see, 3-bedroom, and there was these speed bumps, very aggressive speed bumps, and there was this green Lamborghini that drove past. I thought, okay, that's interesting, and immediately I was thinking, sounds very, very suspicious. And then behind it, there was another green Lamborghini, and behind that, there was another green Lamborghini, and that's when I realized it was a barat. It was a wedding procession. And so they'd hired these guys in Bradford. They'd hired all of these Lamborghinis and all of these sorts of things, and so it got me researching, and I found out that when it comes to the average cost of a wedding in the UK, I mean, I'd be interested to find out because typically the audience don't know this. What's the average cost of an Asian wedding in the UK? Can I have any takers? No. Yeah, 50,000, and that was before inflation and everything else. Because the last time I checked was a few years ago. £50,000 is the average Asian wedding, and
Yeah.
Does it?
30.
is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, Kabzi gets very upset about this because he remembers back to his own wedding and the amount he had to pay.
Still pay for it.
So £50,000, and that's because we're hiring out 3 Lamborghinis. That's because there's always a guy with a dolki as well. Often is a Sikh guy as well. I don't know if that's a standard thing across all cities. And we've got the helicopter. Have you seen a helicopter? Chocolate fountain. There's all sorts of things kicking off, and then you have that, and it's one day, and then you go back to driving your Toyota Prius, and I can say that because I've got a Toyota Prius, and that money has been wasted. Now, instead, what we should do is be Gujarati. So Mohsin Patel, I actually can't remember if I went to his wedding. I don't think I made it to his wedding, so I can't pin it on him. But I have been to many other Gujarati weddings. And honestly, it's such an inspiring sight. It's like it's a military operation. They've got, those white rolls. They put them out, community center. You go in, dal chawal, it's always the same food. And it's served out at industrial scale. And then once you eat, you leave and you kind of move on. And they get through hundreds of people, and I actually think they make a profit out of it because of all the gifts. It's fantastic. Now, maybe don't go that extreme if you don't need to. Although if you want to, feel free to. But if you do go down that end of the spectrum, you end up actually putting that couple in a much better position than they would have been in the other scenario. So £50,000. If you really want to spend 50,000, let's take that money and put that into an investment for that couple, because we want to express our love for that couple, right? So let's do it that way. And that 50,000 over a period of 20 years is going to mount up to be enough to put 2 or 3 kids through university. Whereas on the flip side, if we spend it on one day and we go into debt as a result of it, we actually end up crippling a generation, with the debt. On the other side, we free not just one family, but multiple families from debt in the future. And that's just one example when it comes to marriage. Another really simple example is kids. Hands up who's got kids in this room. Okay. So kids, when kids are born, it's often a very, very stressful time. And we don't necessarily think about this. But if we did, and we started saving for kids, £50 a month, just £50 a month. Again, if you add that up over a period of 18 years, you actually end up saving enough to make a very, very serious dent, if not fully pay off university fees, for example. Again, it's these key moments in our life where it can have a life-changing effect if we make the right decision. We should have a pension. Many Muslims, unfortunately, don't have a pension in the UK today. If your employer doesn't have a halal pension, then we've got a legal opinion on the website that you can download and you can take to your employer, and then they usually listen. And it's free money. If you're not taking it, then you're leaving free money on the table that your employer has to contribute in towards. When it comes to investing, I'm gonna flick through this, and I'm gonna really only focus on one thing, which is the benefits of diversification. And I think this is really apparent today because we've got the orange bombshell currently operating in the White House across the Atlantic, and no one knows what he's going to do. No one does. Not his wife, not JD Vance. No one knows what he's going to do. Not even him. Like, he's not even sure himself at times. And in this kind of volatile environment, one really simple tactic that we can use, which is applicable in pretty much every scenario, is diversification, spreading the risk across multiple baskets, spreading our investments across multiple geographies, spreading our investments across multiple, risk categories or liquidities. And don't worry if some of these words don't mean anything. You can dig into it later, or perhaps Google it. ChatGPT is in Dabad. The other thing I was going to say is, from a mindset perspective, people, and I think this is, without wanting to veer into mass generalization, but my general observation, is that men are very aggressive when it comes to investing, and they're overly confident at times about what they want to do and feel that they can do, and they incline towards cryptocurrencies. I don't know why, but they do. Kabzi, are you yeah, absolutely. Whereas women actually tend to be much safer with their investments. And the cardinal sin that I see on this end of the spectrum is that often they are sat for too long in cash, and they're not actually investing the money. And the problem with that is, of course, inflation, but then also zakat. When you compound those two things together, if you start off with £50,000 over a period of 10, 20 years, that actually in real terms depreciates down to something like £10,000. Very, very quickly it mounts up. And at the same time, if we just invested that and didn't worry too much about it, just kind of invested it in a general vanilla run-of-the-mill stock market fund, hopefully Islamic, right? We'd actually end up going from 50,000 to something like 200,000. And so I know it can be quite scary for people who've never invested the first time, but the problem is that what these people are not realizing is that you've already made an investment decision. You've decided to allocate 100% of your money to cash. That is an investment decision. And it's an investment decision where people are making money, NatWest, Lloyds, HSBC, Barclays, and that money is not coming to you. And they're making money off it. So you'd rather make that money yourself. Okay, what I'm going to whiz through really quickly is some of the main investment options that are available out there for you. Is effectively to give you a bit of a scaffolding on thinking about how you should structure your investments as a whole. So basically there are 3 or 4 main areas. Let's say there's 3 main areas. There's stocks and shares, everything that's in the public markets, everything that's large listed companies such as BP or Shell or other, AstraZeneca, etc. And then you've got every uncle and auntie's favorite investment, and for good reason, and that is property. That's real estate. And actually right now it's not a bad place to be with all of the histrionics that we're seeing in the stock market. Real estate, fixed income. So things that are very, very low risk and you can touch and feel the thing that you're investing in. And then finally, you have the weird and wonderful world of alternative investments. And this is a catch-all bucket, that captures all other types of investments. So this includes things like venture capital, investing in early stage technology companies, the future, Zooplas or Airbnbs or Twitters of the world. This also includes private equity, so investing in traditional businesses that are perhaps not big enough to be listed on the stock exchange, but they are also businesses that you can invest in. Slightly harder to invest in, that's why they're alternative assets, than the public markets, because there you can easily access that. And then it also includes things like gold and a whole bunch of other things that go into alternative assets. So you've got kind of 3 big buckets out there for you. And if you kind of think about the buckets, stocks and shares is kind of medium risk, medium reward. This is like mass generalization, but broadly speaking, it gives you a framework. Medium risk, medium reward. Fixed income real estate is low risk, and it kind of gives you a steady income, medium reward as well. And then you've got alternative assets. Typically, this is higher risk, higher reward. And you want to have a nice mix of all of those 3 things. I remember that I used to look after my brothers when I was younger after university, and I learned how to cook biryani. But what I didn't realize was that you're supposed to put salt when you boil the rice. No one told me this. And so every time I'd put a little bit more salt in, but it would just be really, really bland. Until one time I realized it was actually 2 or 3 tablespoons worth of salt that actually need to go into this stuff at the scale that I was only cooking once every 2 weeks, my poor brothers. And it's the same with investments. You need to make sure that you balance the investments. You need to make sure that you have the right amount of garam masala, not too much, the right amount of salt, and the right amount of water. I'm not sure how exactly that analogy fits on to these investment categories, but you get my point. Moving on very quickly. So Cur8 Capital, We have an app. We have scammers who now clone our app remarkably as well. We have this constant fight with them. It's like, us versus, it's like USA versus China, but it's us versus these scammers in all these different countries. But anyway, we've got an app and a website, Cur8 Capital. And the whole idea behind it started when I was a funds lawyer. And even though it has fun in the name, it wasn't necessarily fun. But one thing what was very interesting about it was you saw how some of the most high net worth individuals across the world are investing. Like you could literally see how the founders of Google or Airbnb or Amazon were investing their money. And one thing I noticed was there wasn't very many Muslims, or there wasn't very many everyday individuals actually accessing this stuff. And so the whole idea behind Cur8 was, let's actually combine everyone's wealth together and create a structure that gives access to these investments, because you can't access these investments with 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 pounds. You need several millions of pounds. And once you have that, then you can actually get a seat at the table. And so that was the whole thesis behind it. So, alhamdulillah, we've got FCA authorization and we're fully launched. In terms of what we cover, so we don't cover public markets. We don't cover stocks and shares and ETFs and things like that yet. Potentially, we probably will do eventually, inshallah, at one point. What we do cover is fixed income and property. We do cover alternatives, venture capital, and private equity. So we cover the lower risk end of the spectrum relatively well, and we cover the really high risk end of the spectrum relatively well. And then we don't necessarily cover stocks and shares at the moment. I'm not going to go through all of the various different types of investments. If you do want to have a chat with us, then you can feel free to grab one of us. I think everyone's got a lanyard, apart from myself, because I've been naughty. We don't actually have a name tag. We've got the lanyard, we didn't get the name tag. So you actually have to look for the lanyard. And the team will be very happy to help. And we're also around during this evening, so you can feel free to grab us. But otherwise, I also, if you want to speak specifically to me, I'm also around. But I also do have drop-in sessions every Friday. So you can just book a call with me for 10 minutes and we can talk about whatever you want to. I've had some mad conversations over the last several years. All sorts of people reach out. Fantastic. So I'm going to now hand over to the wonderful Mars El-Brogi, who is I don't know, what are we calling you, Mars? Video producer? Team IFG. Yeah. Team IFG. So Mars has had a very august career in digital media. She used to work for the BBC, and then she used to work for Islam Channel, and God knows several other places as well in the middle as well. So we're really pleased to have her, and we're really pleased to have all of these panelists. But let me not steal your thunder, Mars. Let me hand over to you, and inshallah, we're now going to hear from the panelists. Jazakallah khair, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining me. Assalamu alaikum, sisters. Welcome and thank you for joining us today, and also to the 200 people that are watching us online and possibly more. Welcome. Well, we are here in our Women Who Invest event in London, and I just wanted to give you a bit of intro to our powerhouse of a panel. So to my, God, I've always had a problem with my directions. To my left, I've got Hina Awan. She is a vice president in the markets digital assets team at JP Morgan. And then Aisha Akbar manages a range of multi-asset and multi-manager portfolios for retail and institutional clients at Fidelity International. And she's also responsible for assets of more than $9 billion. And Zainab, right at the end, is the head of funder community at Funders in Good, a venture philanthropy fund for faith-based nonprofits. And Mashrufa Mia is a senior investment manager at Saracen and Partners, which is an asset management firm based in London. Welcome, welcome, ladies. Right. Well, I think the first thing that we need to know is to kind of find out your journey, because some of you didn't even think you would be here. So let's start with you, Hina.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. So as you mentioned, I've been at JP Morgan for my whole career. So started off doing kind of the spring week, summer internship, graduate program, that pathway into finance. Never expected to be in finance and definitely did not see myself building a whole career in it. But it's been really good. It's been really interesting. I've worked on a variety of different assets, starting off in FX, and now I work on blockchain. And my path and kind of journey in investing has really only started this year. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
We're sharing.
All right, assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Aisha. I have been working for a little bit longer than Hina, but like Hina, I never thought I would end up in finance. I mean, I'm Asian, so if you're from my sort of background, you only really have a choice of 3 things you can do when you grow up. You know, you become a doctor, you become an engineer, or you become a disappointment. So, but thankfully, my parents were amazing. You know, I was going to become a doctor. I had the grades, alhamdulillah, but my father kind of said, look, have a bit of diversification, take some other subjects, you know, in your GCSEs and A-levels. And I took economics and absolutely loved it. You know, for me, this was like, wow, this is amazing. This is about how people make choices. You know, and then I was very fortunate. I did an internship at an asset management place and said, this is even more fun than economics, right? But I don't want to just be looking at GDP numbers. This is how you apply economics and, you know, how you can actually, you know, do something and make some money as well. And, you know, I think it's really interesting because, you know, when you come from my sort of background, you know, my parents were incredibly supportive, but it was like, we don't actually know anything about this. You know, like most people who came there, they came with very little, they didn't have very much. It's like, you know, we don't actually know how to help you and get you, you know, into places. So it's always been a learning journey. But I think for me, what I really like about investing is actually how much it can be a force for good. You know, this is about helping my clients, you know, save for things that they like, helping them to have more choices in life, you know, helping them to retire well or to provide for the expensive weddings that, you know, that we need. So I think there is a lot that you can do in this field, and it's something that I'm really pleased to see so many of you interested in as well.
Mash. So unlike Aisha, who's a veteran of the game, I would say that I'm pretty early on in my career. So coming up to 9 years in financial services industry, I studied politics at university, had no desire to enter the field of finance. I was a pretty lefty socialist at university, very anti-capitalist. So to think about the roles that I've taken post-university, you know, 19-year-old me would be surprised. Why did I enter? I entered because of exactly what Aisha mentioned, which is changing and driving change through the structures that are, you know, forced upon us. And so I thought, okay, if I entered field finance, what can I do to achieve that change? So lo and behold, I thought JP Morgan was the best place to start, and I started very similar to Henna. We actually met on the internship at JP Morgan. We were 21. Spent 4 years there, COVID through there, and then I really struggled with I had a huge identity crisis at JP Morgan, didn't really know why I was in the job, what I was really doing for society, what impact was I having with my day job, and therefore took the plunge to do something much more kind of purposeful and impact driven, and then I landed the role that I'm in now. So I'm currently an investment manager. I work in the realm of kind of philanthropic capital. So I manage investments for large charities, endowment funds, foundations, and help charities grow their capital, if you like. And it's very much in line with what we will talk about in detail, which is kind of Islamic finance and kind of various ethical restrictions that apply to those types of portfolios. So that's my journey.
Same.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Zainab. My story is even more topsy-turvy than these guys, but I became an engineer, so I became Aisha's second option. And I was obsessed with airplanes and spacecraft and rockets through uni. I studied aeronautical engineering. And the reason I got into finance was because at the time, I don't know if any of you guys are space nerds, but what Elon Musk did with SpaceX, he was only able to do that because he had his own private money. He made a lot of money off of the exit of PayPal, as did his co-founders. They're called the PayPal Mafia. And I sort of looked at how he'd accrued a lot of wealth, and it was through investing, and it was something that I saw engineers didn't know a lot about. So I literally Googled the best investment banking graduate schemes. Goldman Sachs was at the top, and I just thought, okay, I'll go for that one. Alhamdulillah, I got in. And I realized while I was doing that it wasn't as exciting or interesting as what my aerospace engineering degree had been like. I then came across a venture capital fund who invested solely into aerospace technologies, rockets, satellites, that type of thing, which was an amazingly exciting job. Got to work in speaking to sort of really entrepreneurial engineers who wanted to create these amazing companies. And that's where I learned all about early stage investing in venture capital. And I wish I'd known about that in university, so I wouldn't have had to go to Goldman's to learn about finance. And throughout that, I think, like a lot of us, like you mentioned in your job, you start to see, is this aligned with my values? And you start to see, who am I helping fund? And I thought, do space businesses need more money? What are the problems that's going on in the world? As Ibrahim mentioned, we're all witnessing the genocide that's happening. And I started to look inward to the Muslim community and see what we were lacking. And we're lacking that strategic investment and strategic funding into Muslim charities. So then I came across Fund is in Good, which is a venture philanthropy fund. And what that means is we're essentially set up like a venture capital fund, except we don't invest into technology startups. We invest into faith-based nonprofits, and we don't do it for a financial return. We're doing it for a social return. And as we all know, as Muslims, we're doing it for the return we'll get in the hereafter, essentially. So I am about 5 years into my journey. I don't know how the next 5 years is going to go, but that's it so far.
Well, may Allah give you an amazing journey, all of you, inshallah. I think what would be really interesting to hear is that as Muslim women in the investment space, what kinds of challenges have you faced and how have you navigated them? So we can start with you, Zainab.
I think the start of it is really, people again think, oh, finance. Especially I experienced it with engineering as well. When I used to tell people I'm taking physics at high school, they're like, why? Girls take biology. And it's like those automatic biases that we had built in. So you're already maybe facing biases you get from your own community when you're doing something that's quite forward thinking, you're doing something that's quite, you're wanting to sort of better your life. So you're facing those ones. And then there's also just a lack of, it sort of seems like a boys club to a lot of people. And there's a lack of information there. And I guess it all just stems from intimidation. And that's one of the main challenges. And you have to be quite courageous and ballsy to sort of get over that first step. Even if you do get a really coveted position on an investment team, there might be ways they shun you out. There's a lot of investment funds have a heavy drinking culture, which is changing, alhamdulillah. And so there's not even, if you even manage to overcome that barrier of getting into the sector, it's then also progressing and all those extra sort of hurdles that come with it. But it's all changing. It's not doom and gloom. So I don't want to scare anyone off of it. But that is essentially what women hear. I think a lot of it is the negative parts of it. So they are sort of trained to stick to safe careers. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you do end up massively underrepresented. And not even from the representation point, you're also just not getting the most out of your money as you could be getting.
Yeah, definitely. So completely echo everything you've just said. I work in the blockchain industry, which is generally very male dominated. A lot of the time when I go to conferences and things, not only am I one of the only Muslims in the room, I'm the only woman in the room, I'm the only junior in the room. And that can just make you feel so out of touch and so alone in those spaces. And a lot of the time I say to myself, it's really cool. I have to acknowledge that it's really cool. And I have to acknowledge that I am representing the Muslim women, but it feels awful at the time. It feels so intimidating. I go up to these people, I try and have conversations with them, and they will completely blank you. And I've been in spaces, even last week, I was speaking at the Romanian Parliament, and the night before I attended a dinner with all the panelists. And the same panel that I was on, the speakers that I was on speaking with, when I went up to them the day before, they just completely ignored me. And it's just those sort of rooms when you're so constantly faced with that, you really have to just kind of be brave, and you really have to know that, okay, I know I'm good enough. I know I was invited here. I know that my journey here is just as good as anyone else's. And that I am representing, and that's how we have to kind of progress ourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, echoing all the sentiment. One thing that I would add is that as a kind of a visible hijabi in the kind of investment space or kind of finance space, it's really quite challenging because it's actually, many people you would think in London have interacted with a visible Muslim woman, but they have not. And so there are lots of kind of preconceived assumptions of what we're like and how conservative we are. Being humorous, entertaining office jokes is kind of surprising to lots of people. The challenges that I found is very similar to Hina, which is, and Zaina mentioned, which is you get the seat at the table, you worked really hard to then obtain a credible role in a financial services bank or asset management house. But then you're not acknowledged, your presence is not acknowledged around the table, your opinions aren't. And the only thing that I could recommend is be curious, ask questions, do your research, and over communicate. You can never under communicate. And the reason why I say that is because even when we as women are over communicating what we're working on, that will never be as near as much as how men communicate. So just let it be known, you've worked hard to get there. The second thing that I would mention is that there's a real serious social problem when it comes to the finance and investment sector, because a lot of people that end up in this industry, it's a function of their educational outcome, and whether it's university and whether they got the spring week and the internships. But it's, send those cold emails, be proactive in the game. Don't allow, you are, it's such a cliche phrase to use, which is like you are in charge of your own kind of destiny. It's so cliche to say, but you can change it however you like, and remind yourself day in, day out that you've earned your role there.
Awesome. Aisha.
So totally acknowledge what everyone is saying here, but I'm going to give a slightly more optimistic take on everything that's happened.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I have no imagination, but I've genuinely never felt, blanked out. And that's because I think you have to come into this with a little bit of confidence in your ability. So as everyone said here, I've earned my place at this organization. And the really great thing about asset management is investment is that it's, the numbers, it's all about the numbers. You can put your numbers in front of people. So if somebody's blanking you out saying your opinion isn't good enough, actually my funds done better than yours. It's that it gives you that confidence to know that, no, I have this place and I can do what I want. You guys, I'm so glad you're here because 10 years ago, we could not have this panel. There weren't enough of us in the asset management industry. But that is also something that you can use to your advantage, right? If you're the only short, brown woman, Muslim in the room, people will remember you, right? You are noticed. If you are saying something sensible, the chances are that somebody can remember that. So if you're good, if you can do the job properly, be confident in who you are. We can make a difference. We are making a difference. And I think we will see more of us, inshallah, in this field going forward.
Yeah, amazing. So my next question is, in terms of the changing attitudes towards investment among the Muslim community, how have these changed throughout the years, particularly towards like working Muslim women? Start with you.
Sure. I was thinking about this on the way here, actually, about kind of, it's a general statement to say that Muslim women don't invest as much, right? And I think it is true. And I was trying to think about what it is about being a Muslim woman that stops us from investing. And I think I've kind of narrowed it down to three things. We'll see if everyone else agrees. But the first thing, I think, obviously, there's a lack of education. There's barriers to investing as it is if you don't come from finance backgrounds, and a lot of us don't. Then understanding all the different routes that there are to take can be tricky. And then you add on top of that the halal element to it, it becomes even more complicated to understand. And so that definitely, when I've had conversations with my friends, that's probably number one. Number two, I think Muslim women generally, we have quite short-term goals for our investments and for our money. And I think that's dictated by the fact that, as Ibrahim mentioned, we haven't had to we haven't had to think about, okay, I'm going to be a provider. We haven't been in these spaces a lot of the time where we are the providers. And Islamically, we're not supposed to be the providers. But you don't know what's going to happen in your life, you know? We can't just rely on other people to be able to fund our lives. We have to be able to be in charge of our own money. And if that isn't just to provide for ourselves, it can just be to enhance your life, right? It can be conversations like sending your kids to private school. Like these sort of decisions that you make now decide the rest of your journey for generations to come. And so I think that's probably another aspect. And then I can't remember my third point. We talked about it earlier. I'll come back to it if I remember it. So yeah, I think it's great that we're having these conversations, and it's really important for Muslim women to be involved in this. And I've only, like I said at the start, I've only just started my investment journey, and I've been in finance for 9 years. So I don't want anyone to feel like it's ever too late. It's always, and I think the other aspect I was gonna say is that speaking to your friends, you look at Muslim boys, they are always talking about finance, and they are always talking about investing. And if it's crypto, it's crypto. But Muslim women, we have a lot less of these conversations, and they're really, really important to have, because that is another form of education, right? Me and Mash the other day were just talking about our pensions, and she hadn't looked at her pension in a while. But that conversation triggered her to do that and make those decisions. And again, these sort of conversations now will impact the rest of your life.
Yeah, what do you think?
So I think, I mean, if you look at sort of Muslims in this country in particular, I think it's important to keep the context in which where most of us or most of our families came from. Most of us came without very much. You know, you kind of came here, the whole idea was to sort of get a steady job, you know, try and support the family. If there was anything left over, you kind of gave it, you know, to your kids' education. So there wasn't actually very much, you know, the thought of investing, if anyone knew anything at all. And of course, if you had something left over, you put it into property, you put it into gold. Those were the things that worked. But, you know, alhamdulillah, I think the community has established itself more. There is more education, both in the secular sense and actually from an Islamic perspective as well. And I think this is quite important because, you know, women from an Islamic perspective have always been encouraged to be independent. You know, our mother Khadija was a businesswoman. You know, she supported her family. You know, this is not something wrong. You know, so I think both as we are becoming working women and becoming, you know, alhamdulillah, a little bit more educated about our Islamic values, I think those attitudes are changing. So, you know, I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is investing itself is a very emotional game. We are human, as humans, we are emotional beings. And I think when you are the child of an immigrant parent, we have this psychological kind of barrier that prevents us from investing. You know, we're fearful that we could lose that money and therefore don't want to part with it. And I think we've inherited this scarcity mindset of our parents, and you know, this huge kind of, as I mentioned, the fear that we won't make it back. But actually, if you look into the materials, if you speak to people, if you watch, you know, videos on YouTube and look at the art of compounding, you'll be able to, as Hina mentioned, be able to truly, you know, change your family's life for the better. So I think it's definitely there's a psychological barrier there. The second, I would say, is the biggest misconception amongst people, but also Muslim women particularly, is that you have to have a huge amount of cash to invest. You don't need to have a huge amount of cash to invest. You could invest as little as £50 a month. You can, you know, as Ibrahim mentioned, total your income minus your expenditure and see what you have. And if you can apportion a percentage of your net income a month, then that, you know, that will do its work for you. You don't look it away. You don't think about it. You don't need to have hundreds of thousands of pounds to be investing. So that's the second thing that I'd comment on.
I think Zainab as well, we were just talking about it, like, is being rich and being Muslim, is that like a dirty word? Is that what's preventing us from kind of like thinking we should invest and become well off?
Sometimes people, I think they associate, because multiplying your wealth is associated with capitalism, it's not rooted in having trust in God that you're going to have your income set. And so that's why as Muslims, we sometimes think, I'll keep it safe with what I've got. That's enough. It puts money on the table. You shouldn't be trying to accrue wealth so that you collect it. You should be accruing wealth to give it away. Now me going over to the non-profit sector and going over into the charity sector, giving your zakat as a way of purifying your wealth. And I think we all know wealth is a test. So the more of it you accrue, most likely is going to be harder for you to get to heaven, right? Because you're going to get attached more to the worldly goods. So you should look at it more as a way of, why should I not use my intelligence, using my smarts to multiply my wealth, increase my influence in the world? I don't have to you can still keep your humble lifestyle. And so there's a balance around not just seeing investments as buying into capitalist behavior. It's not what it is at all. Money is just a means to increasing your influence in the world. You can then give it away when you've accrued that influence, and you should be giving away. And the other point is, I think I was just thinking when you said about previous generations, or why do women not invest? I think we're doing our mums and our grandmoms a disservice, just because for as long as I can remember, they did invest a lot, and they invested heavily in gold. And so I can think of so many stories growing up where somebody's business had gone under and their wife sold her gold. And I think we've all heard of that stuff. And so women's investments have come to the rescue. And I do think that maybe it's just what Ibrahim was saying, was we're quite comfortable with investing in gold, quite uncomfortable with investing in real estate, because we've given information on how to do that. We just haven't been educated on the stock markets. We certainly haven't been educated on venture capital. That's not something that you see many Muslims in, other than Cur8 Capital and some other funds. Venture capital is very much a rich man's game, and it's very much people who have accrued that billionaire status, so they've got money to give away. So I think we are doing our parents a disservice there. And another thing also came to me where I thought, do women not trust other people with their money? But I look back at the previous generations. I don't know if you guys have ever heard your parents giving money, or your mums pulling together money for a committee. And so I do think that they did have that financial savviness, and they did let other people manage their money. Maybe they just didn't trust men to manage their money. That was why they don't want to give it to invest into the stock market. But it's just an education piece. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, because we do have that, or our parents' generation did have that foresight to try and multiply their wealth, and they did essentially. But it's just that the world's changed on how you do that, and gold's maybe not as accessible for us as much. So educate yourself and come to events like this and look at the alternative investments you can make.
Oh, Zainab, my mother was a better investor than me last
Yeah,
year with gold
exactly.
prices going up. So,
Yeah.
Which leads me to why is it important for Muslim women to invest? How is that going to contribute to their financial independence and long-term security?
I think it's everything that we've kind of said, where you don't know what your life is going to look like. You don't know that you're able to rely on other people. And also, as you mentioned, Khadija was a provider, right? We want to be the absolute best. And alhamdulillah, a lot of us are in a position where we've been educated so well, and it's about putting that education to use. And also, as Zainab mentioned, investing is not just for our own self. It's about being able to give back to the community, about being able to give back to your family. If you have cash and your family are taking out loans and they're paying interest on that loan, what are you doing, right? That is money that you could be giving to them, and when we talk about halal investing, and when we talk about, a lot of people talk about moving to the Middle East because they want to live in these Islamic societies. We have to kind of think about, we've got a massive Muslim community here. How can we facilitate that? How can we build this ecosystem? And obviously we have our own versions of trading apps, and you've got things like Cur8, which are doing that work. But we also do have to look at the decisions that we're making on a daily basis, and how we're contributing to that, and not giving in to capitalism, right?
So I think there's a few reasons why women should be investing in, Muslim women in particular. I think the first thing is women tend to live longer than men. So we've got to provide for ourselves for a lot longer than men. We retire, we live longer. You don't want to be a burden on society. You want to be able to look after yourself. So we need to have a little bit more income. That is actually more difficult for women to do, when you realize that actually women tend to, even if you're working, you tend to take time out of work, either because you're caring for kids, or increasingly because you're caring for elderly parents or elderly families. So, making up that difference between what you're putting into things like pensions, which everyone should be taking full advantage of, is going to be a problem. So we need to find a way to make up that gap. So you've got to, investing is an easy way, something actually you can do from home that, could fill in that gap. And I think there's two other reasons why, from an Islamic perspective, for Muslim women, it is so important. Sorry. So there's two reasons, I think, from an Islamic perspective, why we really should be doing this. One is that we have obligations, right? So, we've just gone through the month of Ramadan. I think a lot of you will have sorted out your zakat. Zakat is an obligation on women. Whether you're earning or not, whether you have gold, it is your obligation to pay. Yes, your husband can pay it. Yes, your father can pay it. Yes, your brother can pay it, but there's no obligation on them to do it. That is our responsibility to pay our zakat. So having some funds to do that is super important. And the other thing is also, you guys are all young, mashallah, but, Islamic wills, Sharia, the inheritance laws that we have. If you think you're going to get a lot from your husband's estate or your father's estate, that's not going to happen, right? And that's in the best case scenarios when you are getting your rights. But estates, in the best of times, take a long time to sort out. So having your own source of income is pretty important. So I think it is quite important for many reasons why Muslim women should be investing.
So the only thing I'd add is that it's really important to remember that Islam honors women in the sense that we are granted full ownership of our income. We can use it as we wish, which is very different to men who, are in charge of provision when they are married. So we're honored in that way. Secondly, Islam encourages financial independence for women. It doesn't deprive us of it. We've spoken at length about Khadija radiallahu anha, and how she, someone that we should all look up to, men and women combined. And the third thing I'd say is that Islam encourages financial preparedness, if that's a word, which is, you're not considered to be any more noble if you're poor. The accumulation of wealth, the growing of wealth is something that we should all aspire to do. And as Zena mentioned, to redistribute that wealth is what we're also recommended to do. So it's just being aware of what Islam mandates on us as individuals and as women. We can choose to spend it as we wish. And to your point, Aisha, Hina rightly pointed out to me, kind of in Islam, men have more inheritance rights over women in the sense that they are the providers of families, and therefore, I think the stat, when I looked into it, when we had that discussion, women with children have 1/8 of entitlement to their kind of deceased spouse's kind of estate, which is very little, and that's all the more reason why we should be investing our money to protect yourself.
Zainab?
Yeah, all of the above. And also just from a very practical standpoint, you not investing is also, like Ibrahim said, a decision, and you need to be doing it just to basically beat inflation and for your zakat, essentially. So it's not even, you're not even at this point like investing to multiply your wealth. You're investing just to almost maintain it. And so you should look at it more from that standpoint. You wouldn't just be giving away something for free if it wasn't money, but you are doing that if it's sitting in your bank account. And I don't think people are quite savvy to that. They just think, oh, I'm saving it. You're not really saving it if it's in your bank account. You're actually losing it.
I think, Zainab, you mentioned earlier on like a common misconception about investing was that you needed to have like tons of cash, basically. Are there other misconceptions, like common misconceptions out there about investing, and how can we demystify this?
I should take that one. So I think the biggest misconception when it comes to halal investing or Sharia compliant investing is that it is a very exclusionary and restrictive way of investing, and people assume that the investable universe that is available to you is actually very small. In actuality, it's not. And so all halal investing or Sharia compliant investing is applying an ethical overlay on traditional investing. It's screening out those sectors that are morally dubious. It's at odds with kind of Islamic values, and we can speak about, alcohol, adult entertainment, and the sorts. And when you actually look into the numbers, and because I do this as a day job, when you actually exclude those, primary kind of sin sectors, as we talk about it in our industry, it only excludes around 6 to 7% of the global equity market. So actually, there's a huge opportunity that's still available to investors, and I think that's the biggest misconception that people have, is that there's actually very little to invest in. And then it comes to the second point, which is around financial literacy. The industry is littered with jargon, which puts Aisha and I in a day job, and that's why we're there. But with technology, there are so many TikTok accounts, there are so many YouTube accounts, Instagram accounts that you can follow that kind of debunk all of those myths. So we don't have an excuse, is what I'm saying, in terms of getting educated.
To add to that, actually, around the halal investing, a lot of the industry is kind of heading in that direction naturally, because with the rise of ESG, which is like the economic, social governance aspects of investing. And you've got more than just Muslims who are looking to exclude harmful industries. And so that kind of makes it more accessible. You don't necessarily have to go down the route of looking at Islamic only or Islamic only apps or Islamic only funds to be investing halal. And when you kind of look and start your research into Sharia compliant funds, assets, finance in general, I think one of the conversations I've had with my friends a lot is that it can be quite confusing when you look at things in isolation, because you look at, for example, a halal mortgage and you see that it doesn't have interest, but structurally it feels like you're paying interest because you're paying a slight amount on top of what you would be paying monthly. So structurally it feels the same, and it feels almost like a cop-out to a lot of people. But what is important to understand, especially on that, is that this is all part of, again, building a whole ecosystem. It's part of a whole society. It's supposed to be rules for a whole society. These things don't work in isolation. And so these rules aren't created in isolation. So whilst it might not make sense on an individual basis when you're looking at one specific asset or one specific finance rule, you have to kind of take it in consideration of everything else. And that's really important when you're making your decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you're making about sort of people sort of saying, oh, this Islamic product, it's just like a conventional product, you're just putting lipstick on a pig. Yeah. And I think, I really think we need to change this approach, right? It may not be perfect, but we can't make perfect the enemy of good. We have to try and do these things. And also, I think, this concept that Islamic investing has to be very different from conventional investing, as Mashura said, it doesn't have to be that way. It isn't. A lot of things are very, very similar. A lot of the things that we're talking about in ESG terms are Islamic ones. Yes, you have to be careful of governance. Yes, you have to take into account social, environmental concerns. These are all really good reasons and good things to do in conventional investing as well. So I think, let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. Alhamdulillah, there's so many good things happening within the community. Is it perfect? No, but we've got to be in the game to try and change it and to improve it. To go back to your Islamic mortgage point, I was on the case with my company saying, you're charging too much. Why are you doing this too much? Why are you doing this? If you're in that, then you can make that change happen.
Well, I've got a couple more questions before we start to open the floor for your own questions. So my other question is to do with inclusivity. With your experience, how do you think investment, finance, and the investment sector could be a bit more inclusive and welcoming to Muslim women?
I think it's kind of everything that we've spoken about so far about making these spaces, so events like today, definitely. And just, again, this sort of conversation, I think, is more directed to the non-Muslims and also the Muslim men. Zainab made a very good point when we were discussing the panel, that often we can be taken more seriously by non-Muslim men than Muslim men in these sort of conversations. And that's fundamentally not right. Like Muslim women are powerhouses nowadays, right? We are absolutely smashing every single field, and yet we're still made to feel like we don't know what we're talking about. So I think a lot of those conversations need to be had with Muslim men in the room.
Yeah, I think I was talking about the investment events that I used to go to, and like you sort of mentioned earlier, Hannah, that sometimes you'll try to join a group and you'll be shunned out because you think, okay, why is this like brown hijabi trying to talk to me? I'm a boarding school, a son of a really rich, wealthy man. I've never had to speak to the lower class, and that was the sort of impression that people gave at these investment events. And like Aisha said, you've got to be sort of really courageous and really confident and just say, you obviously know to talk to me, I'm representing a certain fund. And they did, and they take you seriously only after you've proven yourself. So after you get those numbers, after you've proven that you're clever enough. And it shouldn't be that case, but unfortunately we have biases speak for us before we've even spoken. And what I got more surprised about is the fact that, like Muslim men are even, they have another barrier because obviously there's like sort of gender divides Islamically, and as there should be. But when it comes to our workplaces, people interact normally as in a very professional setting. And so there's something to be said to just sort of say to Muslim men that you've got to sort of take Muslim women and their education and their opinions of the same value as you would take a white man, because I shouldn't say white, sorry, I should say non-Muslim men, because for them, your sort of merit speaks for itself. And it should be the case in the Muslim sector as well, which sometimes it's not, because they take being a woman as first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people just want to see a grey-haired non-Muslim man you give them investment advice. I think when I've been around certain circles or tables, I've not lived through decades of economic cycles. I've not lived through many recessions, and therefore I think it's important as Muslim women not to have a chip on our shoulder. Yes, it's exhausting to constantly have to prove yourself, and I'm the first to admit that. But it's also important not to allow men in general, men's attitude towards you, kind of dissuade you from entering the space. I can't change the fact that I'm brown and I'm a hijabi, and you can't see if I have grey hairs or not. But
That's why I do it like this.
Exactly. I can't change that. And so what I can change is the experience that you have with me when we're engaging in a conversation. I can change the fact that I'm asking intellectually curious questions, and that naturally, automatically, the barriers start to fall when you start engaging in those discussions. So yes, it's a challenge, but don't shy away from it.
Aisha.
Yeah, so I think in terms of what the finance industry can do to attract women, we've got to make it less male-centric. It's about the finance pros, and that's a lot to do with media representation as well. I can assure you that we've been through a period of quite a lot of market turmoil. And the pictures that you will see will be of traders, frantically on their phones shouting at each other. I'm going to guess that you were sitting there very calmly on your computer, very quietly in a quiet office, just getting on with stuff and trying to understand how to take care of it. That representation in the media is not correct. And a lot of the time, the words that we use in investing are not great, right? It's like beating markets. It's like, that's a very male sort of, trying to do something. It's not about sort of investing, about growing the nest egg or anything. So, we probably need to change that as well. And then what we need is, frankly, we need to hire more women like these guys. Representation matters. When you become part of it, then it attracts more and more people to the industry.
My last question is, in a sentence, what advice would you give a young Muslim woman who would like to enter the industry?
Should we start with Zainab?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, don't have a chip on your shoulder, because that will really stunt your growth when you want to get promoted, and it'll just make you feel more miserable generally. So yes, we've spoken about all these barriers, but don't sort of carry that with you, and just be very, very confident in your own intelligence. And that's because many people will sort of try to doubt you and dissuade you. And there'll be very few pep talks, really. So I think you've just got to have confidence in your own abilities, and don't let everyone's saying that you're underrepresented and you've got all these barriers against you, don't let that sort of be an excuse.
I would say just do it. What have you got to lose? What's the worst that can happen? You don't enjoy the job, you move on. What's the best thing that can happen is you do enjoy the job and you stay and you stick with it. So sometimes we can overthink. Women naturally tend to be. There's something that my manager actually said to me once, which I will share an anecdote, which is he said to me, "Mash, you need to be more like a man." And I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, you know 90 to 100% of the facts when we go into a client meeting, but your delivery is around 60%. Men will tend to know around 60% of the information, but their delivery is so punchy and so forceful that you actually will believe what they're saying in the room. So he actually said, prepare less for meetings and actually focus more on kind of the art of delivering the message. So going back to the main point I was trying to make, which is do it. There'll be many experiences along the way that will shape you into, who you are. And yes, you may get beaten up along the way, but actually you'll look back and I can say 9 years on, it's been well worth it.
Okay. I was going to say, be proud of who you are. And obviously, you can't visibly tell that I am Muslim from first look. But when I now step into spaces, I make it known. And a lot of that has been partly by things like I'm not drinking in these spaces. It's also been, and I'm just proud of my identity because I want to be that representation, right? I want people to be like, oh, okay, yeah, we do have a Muslim woman on our team. I want people to know that I'm fasting during Ramadan. I want people to know when we are talking about Islamic finance that I want to be involved in those conversations. So making it very well known and being proud of that and sticking by those values, even though you're in these spaces which don't encourage it.
And finally, Aisha.
So three things I think if you are coming in here. So like a lot of people have said, be confident in your abilities and in who you are. There is no need for you to hide your Muslim identity. It is part of who you are. It is part of who I am. I've never felt the need to hide it at all. I think also if you're coming into this industry, make sure you know your purpose in coming here. What is your reason for getting into the industry? What difference do you want to make? Do you want to make life better for yourselves? That's very good. Do you want to make life better for other people? That's even better. For me, the thing that I really enjoy here is that it gives me the ability to give to other people. And that is something that is very satisfying to me personally. Everyone will have their own reason, but make sure you have that purpose and align it with your values. And the third thing I would say is that, if you're going to do this, do it well. Strive for that excellence. In the words of Muhammad Ali, the great Muslim boxer, if he was going to be the greatest garbage man, he was going to be the greatest garbage man in the world. As the Sufis would say, you strive for perfection in the knowledge that perfection lies with God alone. And if that's not going to for you the ultimate source, that wonderful verse in the Quran, what is the reward for excellence except excellence itself? So strive for excellence.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, now the floor is open to you, sisters. Who's got a question? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for that. That was very insightful. I am in my university. I'm involved in my university's Islamic Finance Society, and a lot of my job is to do with trying to get the sisters, into the Islamic finance industry, but also just to get them started on their personal journeys. I think one of the things we struggled with is trying to show them why it's so important for them to get started. I think we had a lot of interest at the start of the year and then it just kind of dropped off, and I think a lot of people just felt like it had nothing, it wasn't really their business, it didn't really have anything to do with them. So I guess my question is, what was your wake-up call? What's the message that we can pass on to them to get them more excited about this?
Question.
I think.
Oh, yes. So basically, the question is, what was your wake-up call?
Just thinking about it. So if anyone else wants to jump in.
So what was our wake-up call?
Yeah.
what's going on in Israel and Palestine. And I think that is a way to also get your students involved. You look at one of the most impactful protests has been the student encampments. So young people are very passionate about what's going on. And I genuinely think when things like that happen, it's a test for all of us, and it's a test for Muslims in the West the most to see what are we going to do. And I think if you remind the students that you're working with, really, that the passion you gave physically to having encampments and protesting every weekend, you can have 10 times that much if you become Muslims of influence in the next 20 to 30 years. And so you don't get that by being labeled as Gen Z stereotypical people that don't want to work and are lazy and things. And these are not things that are true, but that's unfortunately the narrative that's going to get told if we don't sort of strive for really senior positions and strive to work and get really good degrees, essentially. So it's almost telling them to be more strategic in what's going forward, because otherwise you will wake up and you'll see, well, why is the rest of the Muslim community globally suffering? And that really is on us as well. So have good careers, but always keep one eye open into your own community and what's going on. And I give that advice because I didn't do that. When I was going for my graduate schemes at Goldman and stuff, I really didn't keep an eye on what my friends were doing or what my mosque was like. And now I'm a bit older and I'm like, I should have that would have given me a better sense of belonging when you're actually feeling lonely in your corporate office.
I think as well, when it comes to kind of Islamic investing, it's a point that Ibrahim made at the start about thinking about the barakah of like the money that we've got, and thinking about, if I don't make these decisions right now, I'm going to pay for them later, whether it be financial penalties or whether it be in the akhirah. Like I have to think about, I have to be thoughtful and I have to be resourceful and I have to know what I'm doing. I can't just leave this. Even when it comes to things like pensions, they're so automatic for a lot of workplaces. They'll just put it into whatever they want, but that's not okay, because I need to be active in that. And it's really difficult to just all of a sudden realize that, wait, hold on a minute, is everything I'm doing, like, is it not the halal way to do it? And am I going to face the consequences for that, and trying to remedy that afterwards?
Yeah. I think we always have to remember that our risk is written. And as much as we can try to grow and accumulate our wealth, that's always been written for us. And the money that we earn in this life is never truly ours, in the sense that we are purely custodians of that money, and the way that we redistribute that money, the way that we spend it in our own time, is all accounted for. I think in a university setting, that message becomes a lot more harder to deliver, because it just seems as if you're going on this kind of religious tirade to kind of convince people to do better. What I would probably recommend for you to encourage more Muslim women to invest is to remind them that when they want to buy their next matcha latte, the price is constantly going up. You know, inflation is burning a hole in everyone's pockets, and so the next time they want to complain about prices of goods rising, remind them that there is something they can be doing about that. So,
Aisha, anything?
Have you talked to them about compounding? It is, you guys, mashallah, are young. Even if you start off with a very small amount of money, £100, you put that into a stock market fund, over a period of 3 years, 4 years, that's going to go up a lot more, inshallah, than it will if you leave it in the bank account. It is amazing, right? You put this money in, yes, you check to make sure that everything is done properly, but the money grows. And the best thing is just, echoing what everyone has said here, is that, money talks. So, if we want to have influence, if we want to have, people listen to us, then yes, money does make a difference. It shouldn't have to be that way, but unfortunately it is. And the more we can do to make our voices heard in every way possible, the better it is.
Question? Another question?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for everything you guys have shared today. It's been
really sort of eye-opening, and it has been sort of that sort of eye-opener to actually do something. But I just wanted to know, there's been a lot of conversation today around investments that are halal or Sharia compliant, or avoiding things that we wouldn't, avoiding things we're protesting against, right? But apart from some sort of avoiding harmful investments, how can we direct it in a more sort of positive lens of, which things do I support out of this pool that is not harmful? Which things do I choose that are actually supporting, rather than just being neutral, something that's supporting the things that I believe in, especially, with related to Israel, Palestine, that kind of thing. So yeah, I just want to know if you have any insights related to that.
Okay.
So it's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I think actually it's a really good point, because I think that is actually another way that the finance industry can become more inclusive to women. We tend to care. We want to invest, in line with our values, and that doesn't have to be Islamic ones, right? And the really good thing now is that there are so many options to go for. You want to support businesses run by women, there is a fund available for that. I know, because I've researched it, trust me. You want to invest in a fund that, is focused on making sure that water is available to everyone. There's a fund for that as well. So, the options are there. Explore, do your research. These things are there. So, and I'm completely with you, right? I am much more about investing to make an impact rather than impact, removing my impacts. I want to support businesses that are going to be good in the future and are in line with the things that I believe in. The options are immense. So yes, definitely there's a lot out there that you can look into.
We'll do some message from the chat as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll have a look at the questions. But any other questions while I look at questions from online? Yes.
Thank you. So my name is Noor, and I currently work in fintech. And I kind of wanted to get your, before I say that, I think it's like across industries, what you said about hijabs. A man called my hijab a sari the other day, which was interesting.
I had the same.
You had the same? Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. And my question to you is, what is your advice about navigating a halal career? Because when I was in university, I did internships in asset management, but I decided to go down the fintech path just to avoid the kind of haram, like you said, sin sectors. And also interest is everywhere. So, when you are doing a client-facing role or providing investment advice, how would you kind of navigate your career to make sure that, it is halal, if that makes sense?
You want to do it? Yeah. So the one, we live in the West. Interest is everywhere. You can't escape it. And so all I could recommend to you is to do your best, and best be, define that as you wish, to remove yourself from situations which are exposed to that. So I remember, again, when I first year of JP Morgan, I had a conversation with a guy who's on my cohort. He left the industry because he didn't even want to utter the word interest when it came to the conversation that he was having on the trading floor. And so he left pretty imminently within the graduate program. And that's his way of removing himself from that space. It's really hard because everyone has differing views. It's very subjective. As Hina mentioned, people are moving to the Middle East because they think that is considered more halal, but actually there are views on my own, but there are lots of fund options out there that are just wrappers for conventional investment, but then rubber stamped as being Sharia compliant. So it's do your diligence to the best that you can, make the decision, and pray and make sincere dua that Allah accepts it for you. That's all that I can recommend. It's very personal.
No, absolutely true. I've worked in the Middle East. Not sure you're going to get the total halal lifestyle that you want over there either. And this is I'm not saying anything bad. We live in a world where these things happen. So I think I think it's great that you want to do this. The other thing I would recommend is that you find your path within that. It's something that I think all of us have to do according to our conscience. There have been times in my career when I've just turned around and said, guys, I cannot do this. And, alhamdulillah, when you say things like that, most people are understanding. Has it affected my career? Yeah, maybe it has. But as Mashraf said, my risk is written. I can do it the right way or I can do it the wrong way. I know what my values are, and I would like to think I can do that. I would also say, again, speaking very personally, that's another reason why it's so important to give sadaqah and purify. I don't know. I'm trying. I'm not perfect. But I think another reason why you do, you try your best, you trust in God, and when you find something that isn't right, you change. But you have to try.
I think also alongside that, it's a lot of your career is in your hands. And so it's about Islamic finance is a massive industry. And so it's about trying to kind of opt into those opportunities. So, for example, I work in blockchain, and I have, anytime there's been any mention, I'm like, put me on that project. I don't care if I don't work on it, put me on that project, because I want to be involved in anything Islamic finance. And I fundamentally think that, this is a bit techie, but I think blockchain really aligns to Islamic value and Sharia law, because it's all about transparency and it's all about kind of showing the supply chain. And so I have I start those conversations with people. And at the panel last week, actually, I brought it up with someone and she put me in contact with someone who's doing a PhD on it. And that started a whole chain of events, which is opening up opportunities. So I think just kind of being proud of who you are, and obviously you're hijabi, so you kind of have no choice in that. But then trying to shape your career in that direction as well. I think you have a lot more control over it than you might believe.
I would say, sorry, just in a practical sense, because I've got first-hand experience of this, is like sort of have your limit of what you won't do. So I had my limit, I'm not going to invest in defense technology, say. And then on a more practical level, which I think a lot of people don't do, is be serious about keeping a rainy day fund. So if you do, your limit is reached, that you can just quit your job, because that gives you the biggest security and the biggest optionality, that you aren't relying on that paycheck. And so you aren't being forced to just agree to things just because you're worried about money coming in. And so I don't think people do that enough. Yeah.
Right. We've had a couple of questions about how to manage finances as a family or as a couple. Who's got insights on this?
I can try.
Yes, Aisha.
So as I keep telling my husband, Islam is fantastic, right? Because my money is my money and his money is my money too. So, and alhamdulillah, he's absolutely fantastic. I'm the more finance savvy one in the family. So I tend to make the finance decisions. I think, like with everything, there's got to be mutual trust, mutual, decision making. My husband has very strong views in terms of what he wants his money to be able to do. So, he's passionate about giving back to the Muslim community, especially for women. He thinks that we really don't look after our women as much as we should. So it's making those decisions together. It has to be on the basis of consensus. But I am in the great position that actually, when it's my money, I can do what it is I want with it as well.
Well, we've had a question online as well. So, what do you do with your money? How do you invest? Zainab, starting with you.
I said I wasn't going to talk about this.
So Hina, has you given you a new to investing?
So I only started my investing journey this year, so very, very fresh advice. And I'm also restricted because of where I work. I have to pre-clear all of my transactions, and so do it very on the safe side. So my investments are kind of split across. Again, I try and follow the diversification model. I have some in stocks and shares, very broad funds. I have some money in property. And then I also try and kind of have conversations with family, friends around startups, those sort of things, because generally venture capitals aren't really accessible or private equity is not very accessible. It's obviously a great way to diversify your investments, but maybe not everyone has access to those things. So just starting at a lower level, kind of by the people I'm surrounded with, and seeing where they're starting businesses and seeing if I can invest in those instead.
Yeah, so I have a Sharia compliant ISA, which I invest in on a monthly basis. So I've apportioned a percentage of my income to be invested in that. That's a kind of a balanced multi-asset strategy, quite risk-seeking. Given my age, I can afford to take a little bit more risk. I don't intend to touch that capital, so I have a Sharia compliant ISA, and then in the spirit of diversification, I manage my own kind of investment portfolio, and that comprises of a number of tracker funds out there, which I have bought. I mean, you'll all be very familiar with the HSBC Global Equity Index Tracker, which most people tend to buy. So I bought into that and routinely try to look for other opportunities. For someone my age, I shouldn't be as risk averse as I am, and I should be delving into more of those alternative esoteric asset classes, but I think I'm not quite there yet, and therefore have preferred to take a much more balanced approach.
I don't think that's a bad approach if you're working in the industry, right? Because so much of our jobs, our bonuses, everything is leveraged to the market. So a bit of diversification isn't necessarily a bad thing. But like my colleague, I need to get advice from her. I'm very similar in that sense that all my investments are equity. I want them to be long-term investments. I want them to be things that I understand and know exactly what is going on. They tend to be trackers because I'm also very cheap and I want to, get the most return that I can. But like here, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of what I can do because I manage money and my clients have to come first. So that has to be, what we're looking at. But really, I want my investments to be boring. This is not about, I want to get on with the rest of my life. I want to have an income. I want to have that independence. I don't think investing has to be super complicated or super complex. It's just something that you do. You put money in every month and inshallah, you watch it grow.
Inshallah. Right, we've got time for a couple more questions. Zainab, did you want to add about how you invest?
No, I think it's a combination of what all you guys do. Yeah.
Right, okay, so we've got one from Ariki. Could the panel each give one practical tip for a 19-year-old who is keen to start investing but doesn't know where to start?
I would open a trading 212 account, which is free of charge. This is not financial advice, I must disclose that. Cur8 Capital is at risk. I think if you're 19 years of age, and cost naturally, as it should be, is an issue, you open something like a trading 212 account, start pooling, 10 to 20 pounds, however much you can afford, and put that away. Because you're very young, you can afford to take that risk. You shouldn't be checking your investment portfolio on a daily basis. It should be a month or quarterly check-in, and put it into more risk-seeking assets, more equities, property for your stable kind of income yield. That's what I would recommend if you're 19.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I would do small amounts to start with, and just be aware that anything you do invest, you may lose. So you have to be comfortable with the fact that this 10, 20 pounds, it could go to zero and I could have nothing left, especially with the volatility of the markets now. But if you start small and if you start early, you kind of get more comfortable with that, so that when it comes to later on down the line, when it comes to making bigger investment decisions, you have a better risk appetite.
Well, I've got one more question for Bertilla. Where do you find credible information on financial information?
Yeah, IFG, yes. As Ibrahim mentioned, they have the halal investing for beginners, which is probably, not having read it, but I assume is kind of a back to basics, one-on-one guide, demystifying all of the asset classes, what they mean, what's halal, what's haram, and they've done a lot of diligence and reached out to a lot of kind of scholars, which they advertise on their platform. So take a read of that. There's lots of kind of financial content creators out there that you can follow. I'm struggling to plug some, but there are plenty out there. IFG, IFG. But yeah, I mean, there is a raft of information out there. And reach out to people like us who are working in the industry, who have an interest in the space, who are passionate about it, see what they're doing, and then, go on your way.
I think also diversifying your research is important. Don't just follow one person, follow different opinions, look at the news and see what's going on and form your own opinions on where you think things are heading. I think just making sure that it's well-rounded so that you're not headed in one direction, because a lot of people have personal views and you don't want to end up just pigeonholed into what they think and following that.
I mean, I think, all of the advice above. And the only thing I would also add is also remember that actually, all these studies, the academic studies show that actually women are better investors than men. We anything from, 50 basis points to 1% more every year. Over 20, 30 years, you're looking at 200,000, of a difference in terms of how much you can earn. So we are good at this. We can do this. It doesn't have to be complicated. But yes, let's start the journey.
Resource, IFG, and also just I'd say chat to people individually that are working in the industry, and ask how they got started. The best way for you to figure out how good you are at it is just start, and have a pot of money that you're just willing to experiment with. That's the best way to do it. And I actually started when I was working at my old fund, and I noticed some of my junior colleagues who had come from wealthier backgrounds, it was just like a no-brainer to them. They're like, oh yeah, we just opened a Hargreaves Lansdowne account and we started off with this much money. I was like, why would you do that with your money? And that's when I started to realize that that's why they then grow into wealthy families and they have generational wealth, is because they just start to experiment earlier, whereas we don't. We hold on to our first paychecks. So just start experimenting, and you will lose some, definitely.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think I bought my mum a pair of earrings as part of my first paycheck. But yeah, I should have invested in gold. But yes, IFG, obviously. But yeah, thank you again so much to our panel. Please, can you give them a big round of applause? And thank you for everybody for coming tonight. And yes, we've got some more refreshments. The Cur8 chai is really nice. So give us a second wind, as we head on to the evening. Thank you so much again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh, yes.
I learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I just wanted to listen to you, Aisha.
You guys are